podcast, Faith, Family, and Freedom, with my co-host, Jim Hochberg. And we are going to be diving into what happens when your child is going to a school that receives federal funds and they demand that your child be vaccinated. What do you do about that? So let's chat about that.
If you do not want your child to be vaccinated, you really need to pay attention and you need to advocate for your child within the structures that we're going to talk about that are already set up to protect your rights. Because what you need to remember is your rights don't come from the government. When the founding fathers declared independence from Britain with the Declaration of Independence, and when they established the federal government with the Constitution, they were recognizing your existing rights that come from God to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and not because they put it in documents, but because God had already given it. That's why they put it in the documents. So we want that perspective. And then we want to say, okay, so how does the system work? If the Department of Education in the state of Hawaii is saying kids, I think they're down to 15 years old or something, have to get vaccinated if they want to play sports at this point in time. If they're going to say down to 6 years old have to get vaccinated when there is a vaccine available, what are your rights? And it's really interesting because the federal government has a Department of Education and the state of Hawaii has a Department of Education, and they both have an obligation to make available to every kid a valid, useful, good educational experience. So what do? So it's kind of interesting. If you are going to advocate for your child, you're going to have to use your computer. You're going to have to go to some websites that have fill in the form complaint mechanisms. And I went and I did that in the it's really interesting too. If your complaint about the vaccine is because you have a religious objection, then you file a complaint with the Department of Justice Office of Civil Rights. So you go to the Department of Justice in the federal government, look for the Office of Civil Rights, and then you look for education complaints, and you put in your name and where you live and all the stuff they ask you for in the form. But the main thing is to say in what your complaint is, it's because you don't like the vaccine for your child based on your religious beliefs. And you have to be able to articulate that. And it's different for different people. Talk to a lot of people. Some people think that the vaccine is damaging the temple of the Holy Spirit. And other people think that the development of the vaccines used aborted fetal parts. And you could have other actually religious reasons. Your religious objection does not have to come from an organized church. If you belong to a church and you disagree with the position the leadership of your church takes on it, you still have a religious objection if that's where you come from.
I want to ask you a quick question. So on the exemptions, and you and I have been kind of following this, right? Because we're getting feedback that thousands upon thousands of exemptions have been accepted, right? Now, I'm referring right now specifically to in the workplace. But what happens when all of a sudden the government starts receiving all of these exemptions and they start coming in? Whereas before you might have had a few trickling in here and there on other issues, but on this one, thousands and thousands of people have now submitted exemptions. What happens on the level where now they're seeing this isn't just one or two people that feel this way, there's a lot of people that feel this way? Are we worried that this could backfire now and the government might start thinking that they need to get more involved in approving and disapproving these exemptions, whether it comes for schools or whether it comes for workplaces, because there are so many now?
Well, the requests are being made to the government. So the government is hearing and deciding the application. So that's That's what happens. It's not the school. It's the Department of Education, the Department of Justice. And let me just go back to where I was, because the objection to having a child take the vaccination starts with, if it is for a family, a religious objection. But then you also need to be able to articulate that if there's no need for the child to take the vaccine because the likelihood of a child to be infected or pass it on or be sick or whatever, the inability of the vaccine to even protect vaccinated people from getting sick and passing it on. I mean, everybody pretty much as ad nauseum talks about, sees all this info. So I want to encourage people to start at the Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Justice if what you're concerned about principally is a religious objection, but you also want to put the medical and the scientific objections in, because it bolsters why your religious objection should trump. If you don't start with the religious objection and you're starting with the medical and the scientific objections as to why you don't want your child to be vaccinated, that's not at the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Justice. That is at the Department of Education Office of Civil Rights. So there, and when you go to these websites and you look at the complaint processes, I don't want anybody to think that everybody's going to be granted their requested exemption. So you still have to be prepared, if you really are serious about not wanting your child vaccinated, to take your child out of school and homeschool them, put them in a different school wherever, I don't know, there may be charter schools or something, where private schools somewhere, or at home. And what I think about the thousands of complaints, okay, if people are not advocating for themselves, they're going to get steamrolled. I want the Department of Justice Office of Civil Rights. I want the Department of Education Office of Civil Rights. I want the State of Hawaii Department of Education Office of Civil Rights to be inundated and have to deal with the fact that people are not going to roll over. Because if we roll over, they're just going to keep knocking us down and rolling us over. We can do this without a lawyer. You can advocate for your kid and be prepared to do the next step if you have to. But for instance, in the Hawaii State Department of Health, they have put together the request for exemption from COVID-19 vaccination requirement for student participation in athletics on religious grounds. It's a one-page form, okay? You fill it out, you send it in. I don't like this form. After you give them your information and your child's information, then you certify to 3 different things, and I don't think you should. You certify that you understand the Hawaii State Department of Education can at any time modify and or revoke any accommodation granted pursuant to this request for good cause. No, you don't. You're asking for the request, and if you don't get the request, your kid's not going to do it. And if they revoke it, you're making complaints at the federal government because they are taking away your child's right to an education. And it goes on. You understand that absent a valid exemption from the vaccine requirement, my child will be excluded from participating in school-sanctioned athletic activities until the department's vaccination policy for student athletes is rescinded. No, you don't. You don't agree with that, and you're not going to sign that because your kid should be playing in athletics because the science says there's really not a problem with kids. You got to be able to articulate that. The third one is, I understand the department evaluates requests on a case-by-case basis and will need to obtain further information regarding my child's above stated religious beliefs, practices, and observances in order to evaluate my child's request. I understand that a failure to provide such information or providing false information to the department will result in the denial. No, you don't. They don't have the right to an inquisition on your religious faith. They have the right to make sure what you're telling them is sincerely held. And if you agree to this stuff in hopes that they give you the exemption, you shot yourself in the foot big time.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons that I enjoy having these conversations with you, is because we have a lot of people who are so angry and frustrated that they get a little bit of knowledge. And what did they used to say in the past, Jim, about a little bit of knowledge?
Something bad.
Yeah, a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous
Oh,
thing.
is a
And
dangerous thing.
so, yes. And so that's what's happening, is like people are getting a little bit of knowledge and then they're just jamming forward with these, okay, this is what we have to do, people. And they don't realize that they're throwing people out basically to the wolves. So I like that you're, and we've done this on every video where you've made it really clear. Look, people, if you choose to do this, make sure that you know what you're doing, you know what the process is, and you are willing to go on with it if they deny you, or because that's really what we're talking about. People, it's not going to be an easy process. Understand that as you're jumping in there, that you're not just going to fill out these paperwork and they go, all right, thank you, Mr. and Mrs. John Smith, we appreciate it, you are now good to go. It's not going to be that easy. I would assume that there's going to be a lot more frustration from people than there are going to be people saying, wow, it was a simple process.
But here's the way I look at it. Okay. In 1776, there was a lot of division in the colonies between people that were called Tories, who wanted to stay part of England, and the people that were not the Tories, who did not want to stay in part of England. And the people that were not Tories activated themselves and they did things to accomplish the goal of separating from England, which, if you read the Declaration of Independence, that's what that's all about. This is your time now to advocate for yourself, your family, your child, your children. Go through all the available avenues to register your objection. If 50,000 people are objecting, people in these offices receiving the objections have 50,000 new files they got to work on. That means something. Protesting at Kapiolani Park means nothing.
That's good. I again, I like it that the encouragement we have to people is we are encouraging action, absolutely, but we're encouraging action with knowledge. You know, you've got to know what you're doing and know what the process is going to be, because you got to know what the end result is going to be. And although, Jim, I'm going to be devil's advocate for a minute, because for those people that are protesting out there, they feel like they are doing something, and they believe they are making a difference, and they don't
Nothing's
care.
changed. Not a thing has changed. It's been a year of marches and protests and rallies, and the government doesn't give a rip.
Well, and you've got thousands of people in some of these instances that are showing up. So what we do know is we know that people are fed up. And when people are fed up, they're looking for an answer. And Jim, here's the bottom line. Not everybody has kids in school, so they're not going to be affected by this.
No, they
But they're
can.
still-
No. And that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. If you go to the Department of Justice, Office of Civil Rights website on the complaint page, the instructions say who can file a complaint. Anybody can file a complaint if they are a witness to somebody else's rights being deprived in the educational process. So the grandparents can file a complaint, and the parents can file a complaint, and the auntie can file a complaint, and the uncle can file a complaint for each kid.
This is interesting. And I think the other thing too is to be aware that it's already happening. Look, all we have to do is look at California to see what's happening. There are people in leadership positions that are saying kids need to be vaccinated, and we need to force them to do that. I want to talk a little bit about COVID and what's happening, because I think you have some thoughts on this. The first thing is, one of the things that is a big frustration to moderate people And there are moderate people out there on both sides of this issue. And I recently saw an interview that was done by a doctor who supports vaccinations, but he made a really interesting point, and I'll try to make the link to that interview as well, because I thought it was a well done interview, where he questioned, when you look at the amount, now if you're just accepting, okay, I get it, some of you are going to be watching this and you're going to go, I don't want to accept the numbers that the CDC is putting out. Okay, put that aside for a minute and just think about this, because I think it's interesting, the point he made. If you take the numbers that the CDC is putting out now as the percentage of people that are vaccinated, right? What's missing from all that is all of the people that have had COVID, and COVID's been around now for a very long time. So there is a large number of people, depending on what reports you're looking at, it could be anywhere from 27% of people, it can be 22%. But even if you're assuming that it's about 20% of the population has had COVID, is it possible that those 20% of people are immune? They got natural immunity. Now, when you add the natural immunity to the vaccinated, you get quite a large number of people that are now protected, so to speak, from COVID, which means that shouldn't we be
Immunity, herd immunity.
Yeah.
I would think so. In fact, recently I was listening to Mike Buck, and he had Dr. Scott Miskovitz, who's a urgent care doctor here in Honolulu, and they were talking about COVID because Dr. Miskovitz is a huge proponent of vaccines for COVID. And I called in, and I on the radio live, I asked the doctor to explain why it is that the natural immunity that comes from surviving having contracted COVID-19, how come it's not included in the vaccination totals of the herd immunity issue? And he said, oh, well, gosh, that's a great question. I'll tell you why. Because the immunity from naturally catching COVID is weaker and it doesn't last as long as the vaccine, based on a study that I read. And so when he finished the rest of his comment, I was given the opportunity to have a follow-up question. And I said, Doctor, can you please refer me to that study? Because I read the Israeli study that had the complete opposite finding. And Mike Buck asked Dr. Miskovitz, can you give Jim the citation to the study? And I was shocked that Dr. Miskovitz said, no, I can't. Which let me just put it in the context of citing authorities as a lawyer. I always remember the name of the case. It's so easy to remember the lead doctor on the study. Oh, that's Dr. John Smith from Duke University Medical School. I mean, it's not hard to remember whose study you're reading. And I think he lost a lot of credibility in my eyes as a person that I am going to trust telling me to get vaccinated.
Well, it's interesting because I think, again, if we're trying to teach people to be responsible in their decision making, if you're a leader in government, we are simply saying that you'll have less frustrated people if you're just honest with the numbers. Hey, we can test for these antibodies. We can test to see if you've had COVID, if you're still there, and if you're still in this area where you're not going to catch COVID, then why should these people be forced to have vaccinations? I don't have time to read and cite every single source, and nobody does unless you do it for a living. I mean, for anybody who's had to write a term paper in high school or in college, you know that it takes a lot of time to actually do a report properly, where you're citing everything exactly properly. And nobody has time to do that unless this is what you do all the time. But our government is doing us a disservice by not being able to just give us simple information. If they could tell us this many people are vaccinated, these many people have had COVID and they have natural immunity, so now we are at herd immunity level, I think people would be less apt to be protesting and be out there. But what we're experiencing is, well, we only have partial information for you, or just like what you said, I can't tell you what that study is that I'm referring to off the top of my head. I need to research it and get back to you. It's like, well, if you're quoting it, you better know where you got it from.
And to wrap up the topic, I would like people to make a commitment to their family and to their posterity. And the reason that's critical is, and I'm going to read the preamble to the United States Constitution, because the reason we are having this form of government isn't just for ourselves, it's for our posterity. I'm going to read it. It says, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, in order to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America, which recognized your right from God to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." And if you're willing to take your posterity, that's your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren and your great-great-grandchildren that will be living in this country, if you're not willing to fight for them against what's going on with this vaccination mandate in school for kids, based on the science, based on religious objections, if you're not willing to do your part, that's a shame. And I want to encourage people, don't just fill out the paperwork online and then accept a no answer. Make them explain it to you. Make them support their position saying, no, your kid has to be vaccinated, and be willing to take your kid out of school if you don't believe your child should be vaccinated.
And may I add to that, document, 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 document. Whoever you talk to, date, time, what their name is, what their position title is. Please, if you're going to bust out your phone because it's a live, for some reason you're talking to somebody live face to face and you whip out your phone, please at least be respectful. You can disagree with them, but be very respectful, because again, I don't want things to come back that, oh, we're encouraging people to get up in somebody's face and to be disrespectful. As Jim's mentioned, they might tell you no. And if they tell you no and you make phone calls, just jot it down that you spoke to John Smith at this time on this day, and here's what he told you. And the reason you want to do that is because when you're gathering all your information later, if you need to have an attorney at some point, you want to be able to provide that attorney with all of the documentation, the dates, the times, in case they have to go and do research for you. The worst thing you can do for an attorney is say, I don't remember. I don't remember who I talked to. I don't remember when I called. I don't know if I called. I don't remember if I emailed. I don't know if it was a text. I don't know who I talked to. Document, document, document.
And the other thing too is, what's really going to change this country to protect our posterity, what's really going to make a difference, is who gets elected in 2022 to represent us. And if we don't change the people in the Congress and the people in the US Senate and the people in the House in Hawaii and the Senate in Hawaii, if we don't change the governor and the mayors, we're going to get the same. And they don't seem to really care too much about the people who disagree with them. It's not a bad thing to have your own opinion about how your government should support your right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's a civil discussion that is perfectly appropriate for election time. And I would encourage people to take your information after you've made these complaints to the people that are knocking on your door. Will you vote for me? Well, let me show you. I went through this process. You want to be one of those guys. I don't want you if you're going to agree with what they did, or I want you if you agree with the result that I got that was a good result. That is how we take back our state.
And a little bit of advice for those of you that may be considering running for office, because I've gotten, like I said, I've been reached out to by people who said, hey, I might consider running for office. Please be very mindful during this next year of who and what you're doing in the public too. If you are coming across as being somebody who's combative, someone who is opinionated, but your facts aren't all there, or even if you're somebody who is a strong person of faith and everything coming out of your mouth is what the Bible says and all that, hey, I'm all for the Bible. And I think you should be standing on biblical principles. But if you're considering running for office, please be very mindful of what you're doing publicly. That people are recording on the phone, that's going to come up and haunt you later.
Well said.
All right. So we appreciate you hanging out with us today. And as you'll notice, we're doing more shows that are shorter, because that was another request by people. Hey, you know, let's do some shorter, quicker. And Jim and I are going to get better at this. And hopefully, as we move forward, we're going to have a little bit more of a professional platform to do this on. And we need your prayers, your encouragement, and your support. So as we always say, make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe to the Hawaii Family Forum channel, and don't forget to hit that bell for notifications. So anytime we upload a new video, you'll be the first to know about it. All right.
Comment.
Oh,
Tell
yes,
us what you think.
Good or bad, or just don't be ugly, because as I mention all the time, if you're disrespectful, if you use cuss words, all of that stuff is going to be deleted. We don't have time for that.
But we want to hear your comments. You don't have to agree. Do it politely, but we do. If you do agree, of course, those are good comments as well.
Absolutely. All right. So thanks for joining us today. We'll see you on the next show. We appreciate you hanging in there. Mahalo, everybody.
Aloha.